have 20 minutes, so I apologize. I'm going to kind of roll through this. I wanted to go through 10 secrets, but we're only going to go through 5. I thought it was pretty good swapping. I was unfortunate that we switched talks, but now at least I get to follow a failure talk. So speaking of failure, let's talk about Plone. I'm a huge Plone fan. I've been in the Plone community for a very, very long time. Plone is a Python CMS. Either you know about it and you hate it, or you know about it and you love it, or you have no idea. Most people remember Plone from the 2007 days where it went through a rough period. We all do. And so there's a lot of negative momentum, but for some reason the community never really died. And in fact, right now it's growing again. And it's kind of an interesting thing because we all have this cycle of frustration where we get really, really upset, and we all are like, man, I wish I could just fucking quit Plone. I hate it. But the thing is nobody can, and it's because of the people in the community, and it's what keeps the project going. So much that there were t-shirts made at some point which said, Plone, I wish I knew how to quit you. And to these days, you see these same people who wore these t-shirts 4 or 5 years ago at the same conferences and the same PyCon, so check for those. If you're going to PyCon US this year, you'll find a few, and you'll know that somebody used to be in Plone or still is. I want to talk about the things that keep Plone going, that keep the people excited, because that's actually one of the most important things in a community, is that it persists. I've been using Plone for almost 10 years now. I'm currently in the I just left the framework team to join the Plone Foundation board, but I've only been really active for the last 4 years. And that's because I did what a lot of people do, is I got really, really frustrated, and I was like, God damn it, I'm gonna go give a talk about how these things frustrate me, and then I just kind of got suckered in. And that's because Plone has a policy of, if you show up at the conference, you will be in the community forever. And that's very, very, very true. And as a result, I just had to give up and wake up one day and say, I just love Plone. I love the community, the software platform's okay, and I want to do it for a long time. So I think that everybody should wake up in the morning and love the platform and the community that they're working with. And I mean community here, we're at a PyCon, but everybody has their sub-communities as well. And I think that those are just as important, if not more, than the broader Python community, because that's what brings people into Python. So there's a couple key audiences here that I'm targeting. One is people who don't work in open source actively, or who are just kind of on the fringe of open source. So there's a lot of different ways to experience open source. You can git and pull through GitHub, and you can do these minor code contributions, and you can start there. Or you can go as crazy as to being completely committed like myself, where you wake up in the morning, the first people you say hi to are your community, and the last people you say hi to at night. And I live with somebody. So, yeah. It's always like, hello, good morning, Plone. And to think about what kind of a choice this is, I mean, I've been working with Plone through 2 major relationships, many, many minor ones, good and bad. I've had 3 cities, 4 major jobs, 2 startups, and Plone were the first people to find out when I have an animal die or when something great happens. So this is a worldwide network of not just coworkers, but some of my best friends that I've ever met. And I think that every community has that potential. And so if you aren't in open source, you have to know that you have that ability, that you can ask for more than just a good framework and some good code sharing. You can expect people, you can expect all different sorts of things. If you're organizing a community or trying to plan for long-term success, here's some of the things that we've done really well that have made people, in times when people hated the framework, stick around and push us through other things. So here's the first thing. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of the women here are coming and talking a lot about communication. I think that that's a pretty interesting thread, but I'm going to talk about it some more. The first thing you need to do is make plans. So if you want to be around for 10 years, you have to plan to be around for 10 years. We just put together a document that said Plone the next 10 years, because we're going to be here for another 10 years, whether you like us or not. So we're going to be in your conferences. And we published it. We did a blog post, and we got key members of everybody in the developer community and the business community to get behind it and say, we want you guys to know that we're going to be here. But it's not just about features. I think a lot of times you get caught up in things like we need to plan 10 years worth of features, or things like that. It has very, very little to do with features, actually. That's more of a short-term type thing. You have to think about infrastructure, who's going to pay to host your domains, testing, are you going to be testing on Travis or Jenkins now or in the future, and who's going to do it long term? Marketing, code cleanup. So you're around for 10 years, which means just like the SciPy guys or like a couple people have said, we have a ton of non-PEP 8 compliant stuff. In fact, we have it hooked up to Jenkins warning us it's like a 5 meg downloaded file of all the places we're violating PEP 8, but that's because the code is older than some people's babies. So the code is old, it's really hard, but we have a plan to get out. It's just gonna take us a little bit of time. And we have to say that we're gonna do it. Conferences and sprints, hosting conferences is a very, very exhausting, tough thing. So how do you transition that from year to year? How do you keep things growing? How do you keep people excited about sprints? At some point, you always run into legal issues. Nobody wants to get bought by Oracle, I hope, or get taken over. I mean, come on. That's like the death of your project. Things like that, who's in charge of documentation? So publishing a document that says, here is how we're going to take the next 5 or 10 years and we're going to address these things and we're going to continue to work on them is really, really important. So making plans too, you have to think about, there's a lot of sentiment that happens when this happens. And over 10 years, people are going to get really upset and things are going to happen. There's going to be divergence in the community. And there's new technologies that come along and they're center stage, right? So people kind of get this thing where they're like, oh my God, I'm nervous because there's this pyramid thing or there's this new Django app and maybe I should just jump ship right now. And this kind of sentiment rings really loudly, even if it's a minor few people. So what we do quite a bit is we do our own metrics. Just like you would measure performance of an app, you have to very carefully choose what you think is important to measure the success of your community. And so I sat back and I said, well, I think that our community success can be measured by lack of apathy, which is something that you only think about when you've been in a very apathetic community for a couple years, unfortunately. So we started tracking mailing list activity on Plone developers. And what happens is you have requests for comments, things like that, all that kind of stuff that happens in the developer community. And when apathy is high, people put out a post saying, what do you think about this? And then nobody responds. So that's a really good indicator of what happens. And what we saw was a couple interesting things when you can see over the last 11 years. We had our releases come out. We had a pretty bad release. It wasn't terrible, but it was just unpopular, let's say. And then furthermore, that came at the same time as a recession, which is something that nobody in open source talks about really, is what effect did this recession have on our community? It had a huge effect for us because we work a lot with EDU and government. So this is what happened, and we saw sentiment hit the floor, and then we had a really good release that came after that and has been helping us come back, an economy that's picking up better. And furthermore, we started tracking this, and then we started hacking it, right? So I basically wrote a script to gather this data, and anytime the average amount of activity with a certain threshold dropped below, I would basically troll the developers list and get people excited. So social engineering. Think about what's important to you and troll the shit out of it. Also, making plans to have leaders. So leadership is a really, really interesting thing, and especially in development, and I'm gonna have to blow through this, so it kind of sucks. Okay, so people move on, especially after 10 years. We have, our BDFL's gone. So imagine what if your BDFL's gone? How does your community get affected? He's not gone, he's around, but he works in Mozilla now, and then he's drinking the Mozilla Kool-Aid. So that's fine, we're not bitter. But we had to get over that, and we had to say, okay, this is a great thing, because now we have an opportunity for our leaders in the community to step up. We had a guy that at some point was putting some really great performance patches in bee trees, and we were like, God, what if Hanno gets a girlfriend? We are fucked. And that is terrible. That is a terrible thing, because Hanno deserves a girlfriend. He's an awesome guy, but we're being very, very selfish. So we have to plan on that. And so really think to yourself, if you're building a community or part of a community, what happens if X people leave? We had a community member die. This happens. It's just like a regular company. People pass on. So how do you build a leadership pipeline to replace these people? And there's a lot of focus, as it is, on saying we need to have a big core group of people, or we have these 20 people, like in certain communities where they have 20 people who run all of core. But that's the thing, is if one of those people leaves, it's a pretty dramatic thing. So we really focus on a wide, like these fringe contributors who occasionally contribute or who contribute in different ways, and try to bring them in as much as we can. So don't ignore these fringe people. Just because someone's that annoying person that puts 20 bugs in the bug tracker like every week, they just need their energy refocused. And so really think about those people and get ready to put them in. You know what I mean? So why don't you work on documentation? So key people will turn over, plan for it, and then one most important thing that I think that we're the worst at, every community is really bad at this, is you always have people who are kind of like these power people and that everybody's afraid of, right? So there's people who are really big, and then people are like, oh, I really want to go talk to him and ask him about this thing, but I'm really afraid. And that people don't step up because that person is in a position and they're afraid of them, and they're like, that person's handling it, I don't need to do it. So we often ask people to step down. And that's not because we think they're doing a bad job. It's because we want a chance for somebody else to come in and do something else. And by step down, we just mean do a lateral move. Oh, man, it sounds like I'm firing somebody. Man, that sucks. Okay, so make plans. We're going to go through this very fast. Sorry, guys. We also have to break plans. Plone has had a lot of stuff where we've been said, oh, we're going to do all these amazing things. In 2007, we're like, we're going to make deco, we're going to make one content type, and it's going to be awesome. And it's 2012, and it's not done. So that's a long time. And now it's to the point where people are like, we don't really want this shit. So but it's really hard to convince the people who've just spent a lot of time working on this to say that we've kind of changed our mind. Sorry, we got a new girl. So admitting that something's a mistake is totally okay. We bring stuff into core, and then we take it back out. We brought inline editing in, we're taking it out. We brought in OpenAuth in, we're taking it out, because it was just a bad idea. So talking about failure, from an open source community level, we have to say, look, we did this 3 years ago, and we really appreciate that you put this time and this code in, but nobody wants it anymore. So definitely make changes. Packaging is also one of those things, too, where I think in Python, there's a lot of pressure with Python packaging to make a ton of packages and make them as reusable as possible. And I know that Django gets a lot of shit because their DB is tightly integrated, but and then Plone kind of reacted to that a little bit and is like, okay, we're going to have 217 packages in our release, and then everything could be reusable. And maybe somebody one day is going to want to use plone.app.initd, but nobody ever does. So now we're like, holy crap, the release manager is so overloaded, and in order to make a new Plone release, he has to work with 217 packages. So this is online, you can go get it, but be careful, think about packages, and think about people trying to manage that. Okay, thinking globally and acting locally. I'm really super, super excited for this conference because I think that regional conferences, and by regional I mean big giant chunks of land, are the key to actually growing any community, and this is something that we've learned more recently. So with the recession, we have a global developer conference, just like everybody does every year, and it changes locations as well. But with the recession, we saw the numbers for the developer conference drop pretty dramatically, and everybody's freaking out. They're like, oh my God, Plone is dying. It's dying. Nobody's coming to the conference. And it was like, well, no, we're just in a recession. And people can't afford to fly to Brazil, and people can't afford to fly to Europe. And so what happened was we started really, really encouraging local symposia. And we're not even the biggest group, we're not Python-sized by any means, but having local conferences is a great way for people who can't travel because they have family, because they can't take a week off from their job, things like that is super, super key. But furthermore, it helps you overcome the language barrier, which if you have a global community or you work with anybody who speaks a different language, you're going to be like, oh, whatever, it's technology, everybody speaks English, which is kind of true. Everybody does speak English, but that doesn't mean they prefer to speak English. So I went to Munich, and we were having a really heated debate about APIs, right? Because you can't have a discussion about APIs. You have to yell at each other about APIs. And there was some point where I was all German people in me, and there was some point where this German guy looked at me and he says, excuse me, Liz, I'm sorry, but I have to speak in German. And he just went crazy, and he just started yelling, and I just was like, holy crap, these guys all want to speak in German, and I'm here ruining it. And German people speak amazing English. So what happened with the rest of that session was that it was in German, and then I just got a summary at the end. But the point is, is that people love to speak in their own language. It makes them feel better, and they get passionate. And so since then we've had South America, and we're really focusing on local symposiums now for this. There's lots of reasons why you want to go, you can read that later, that's fine. Okay, and you want to embrace that local as well. IRC channels in multiple languages, try having mailing lists. There's things to think too, like, for example, I did not know that most Portuguese people who were born and raised most Brazilian people who are born and raised speaking Portuguese don't speak English. And they don't like it, and they don't feel comfortable doing that. So we had this epitome that was like, holy cow, we have a huge Brazilian community, and none of our core documentation for contributing is in Portuguese. So we made a huge effort to translate it to Portuguese, and we've had a big uptick in the community there. There's little things that you can do too as a participant, and you can, if you know that there are people who don't speak native English, like in IRC, don't English bomb them. It takes them a little bit longer to respond to IRC things, and then it takes them longer to respond to mailing list things. So they feel at a disadvantage already. So just slow down. And that's even when typing. They need a little bit of extra time, and they often don't speak up because they feel intimidated by how fast other people respond. And of course, identify regional leaders. They are the best ones who can give you insights into what's actually going on, and then empower them, of course. We try to do that by funding, sending people around, things like that. We also have a really big culture, because of our really global community, of trying to encourage travel amongst each other. And it just kind of naturally happens. It's the beginning of November. We already have 14 sprints in the planning for next year, all around the world, from Japan to Ushuaia, all the way up to Norway. So this is something that, these are sponsored by the foundation, and they're strategic sprints, so we pick something that we want to work on. And if you saw Trace, then you saw that he was talking about it as well. All right. I have no time, guys. I'm so sorry. So, well-traveled community meets natural diversity. Our Plone Foundation Executive Board is 7 people, 4 countries, 5 accents, 3 sexual preferences, nonprofit, for-profit, big companies, individual contractors, and personalities everywhere from troll to peacemaker. You can guess where I lie. So we want to communicate. We're going to communicate, speak up. You have no idea how important it is to get on a mailing list and literally just say thank you publicly. Saying things publicly is probably the most important thing that you can do to anybody, and also especially recognizing people working behind the scenes. If you don't know who is running Django.com or Django.org or DjangoProject.org, maybe you could go look and say thank you to them, because it's a shitty job, but somebody has to do it, and there's all these people who make all these things work that you don't even know about. Be conscious of the fact that they're there and communicate with them. And it doesn't have to be weird or awkward, but you notice that as soon as you do it, like 10 other people are going to start doing it. So also being transparent. There's always going to be toxic people in a community, and the best way to avoid toxic people is to redirect them to public channels. And last but not least, the most important thing you can do in any community is be awesome and expect awesome. There's a sign on the local hackerspace in San Francisco that says, "You are responsible for the energy you bring into this room." And there's nothing more true than that in open source. So if you go into your IRC channel and you be positive and energetic and funny or whatever you need to do to distract from trolls and people like that, then other people will follow. So be responsible for the energy you bring everywhere, even if it's not in person. Think about mailing lists, read your emails, think about your syntax, and follow all these rules, and your community will live long and prosper.